be bold, be heard. Welcome to Unmute Your Mic with your host, Jessica Bell. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Unmute Your Mic.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. My name is Jessica Bell. I am your host from Kansas City, Missouri, as always. And this is your first time tuning in. Thank you so much for joining the Unmute Your Mic family. And if you are returning, thank you again for being a loyal follower and listener. And before we get started, please make sure to check us out at unmuteyourmic.org. And please make sure you like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube, Facebook, and everywhere that you can find a podcast. So now that we've gotten that out the way, I'm so excited to talk to Richard. Richard is in Texas, and I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation, very educated, and about some very important topics. So Richard, thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast. And if you could just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica, so much for inviting me to the program. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with me to talk about this topic of adolescent substance abuse. I have a long history of working in the field of education in Illinois. And then I transitioned out of that after about 30 years and began to work in the mental health area and substance abuse area, originally at a crisis center in central Illinois. Then I moved on to work at Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, which is a large psychiatric hospital serving adults and adolescents. I worked for over a decade treating both adolescents and adults diagnosed with mental health and substance abuse issue. And so many times, Jessica, I would sit across from a family and I would go through their child's history of using substances and what substances they had been using and how often and when they began using. And I would give them a diagnosis of a substance use disorder. And when I finished, they would often look across at me and they would say, I had no idea this was going on. Or if they did suspect their child was using a substance, they might say, I sort of knew something was going on, but I didn't know it was this bad. And these are good parents. These are very good parents doing the best they can. They missed the warning signs because nobody told them what to look for. Nobody told them what the warning signs were. So when I left Menninger, I wanted to write this book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. I kept it short, only runs about 100 pages because parents are busy. They don't have time to read volumes of information. But I wanted to pack it with a lot of information that I hope parents will find useful. And after reading it, perhaps feel a little bit more confident and less fearful of this subject of adolescent substance abuse.
And I think you brought up a really good point. I mean, like when you said, sometimes these are good parents that have just missed the warning signs. Because I think sometimes it's so easy for, parents to feel guilty when something is going on with their child as if they did something wrong. And so could you just touch on a little bit about, what are some of those kind of, those red flags or those signs that parents can typically miss?
Yeah, that is a very good point, Jessica, because many times parents do, when they're confronted with all of this, finding out that their child has been using a substance, they sort of come down on themselves and they criticize themselves and they wonder, what kind of a parent am I and what went wrong and what did I do wrong as a parent? And they really start to become very critical of themselves. The warning signs are often missed because nobody told them what to look for. So in my book, I put warning signs for a child that might be drinking alcohol. I put different warning signs for a child that might be using marijuana. I have warning signs for a child that might be developing an eating disorder or self-harming themselves, because sometimes those can accompany a child using a substance. So all those warning signs are in my book. But as a general rule, what I recommend to parents is pay attention to the changes you see in your child. You know your child better than anyone. So pay attention to the changes that you see in your child. Don't assume that they're just normal adolescent acting out behaviors. They may very well be that, but they may also be an indicator that there's something else going on underneath the surface that you need to be aware of. So some examples would be a child whose grades are starting to decline, a child who starts having disciplinary problems at school, a child who used to participate in extracurricular activities like sports perhaps no longer wants to participate or shows any interest in that. A child who used to introduce you to their friends, you knew who their friends were, you might have even known who their family members were, now becomes very secretive of who their friends are. So these are examples of some changes that as parents, when we see them, we need to pick up on them and pay attention to them and dig a little deeper to see if there's something more going on perhaps underneath the surface.
And as a parent, and for the parents who are listening, if they are noticing, some of these signs or some of these things that you are bringing up, and they start to dig a little deeper, how do you do that in a way that doesn't kind of make the child shut down and not want to share anything with you? How do you dig deeper, in a way that's not alarming for the child?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is have a conversation with your child. And by that, I mean, we don't threaten them. We don't accuse them. We don't get angry with them. We don't assume things that we don't know for sure. But we want to have a conversation with them. And Jessica, we're pretty good at listening to each other's words when we talk, but we're not so good sometimes at listening to the feelings underneath those words. And that's a skill that every parent can practice and every parent can learn. So when we're talking to our children, we're not just hearing their words, we're hearing the feelings and reflecting them back to the child. I'm hearing you say this, but, are you feeling this? I hear you feeling this way. Is this correct? So that we're not just assuming things, we're allowing the child to participate in a discussion where they're giving us feedback. So my recommendation is, first thing you should do is have a conversation with your child. Now, that's a conversation that's likely to go one of two ways. It's either going to blow up and the child's going to become angry and defensive and you won't get much information, or the child might actually share some information with you that you didn't know before. But regardless of how that conversation goes, if you're still concerned that your child might be using a substance or drinking alcohol, you need to move to the next stage and get the assessments done that I recommend in my book by the professionals, so that you have a good overview of what your child is doing, a diagnosis if it's appropriate, and if needed, a treatment plan on what you should be doing next.
I think those are amazing tips, because I think so often, especially as a parent, and I'm not a parent, I'm a teacher, but that was the next thing I was going to ask you, is that sometimes the people other than the parents that are spending the most time with the children are the teachers. And so from a teacher's perspective, how would we address if we're starting to see some of these things that maybe the parents haven't caught onto, but the teachers have? Is it a similar kind of process that a teacher would do?
Yes, it is, because many times teachers notice things that parents don't notice. They're with those child's hours every day, day in and day out during the academic year. So in many respects, they may be the first ones to notice that there's something going on here. And my recommendation to teachers is the same as with parents. Have a conversation with that child. See if you can get that child to open up to you. Sometimes teachers are trusted more than parents, because they've developed that relationship. So if you see some warning signs as a teacher, have a conversation with that child. See if they'll open up. They may not do it right away, but if you keep going back, and if you keep encouraging the child, and you keep listening to their words and their feelings and reflecting those back, there's a good chance that child may open up to you, and you may be the only one or the first one that they open up to.
And what I'm really hearing you say too is kind of like building the relationship with the child.
Yeah.
So you're not coming to the child attacking them or saying, "Oh, you're going to be in big trouble," or off, sending some type of punishment their way, but really making that connection with them so that they feel safe to be able to open up, to you. And I think that's really important as well. And I love that you brought that up. You also talked a lot about feeling the feelings of what the child is saying more than
Yeah.
what they're saying. And how can we practice doing that? Because I'm really big on youth, getting their voice and having their voice and speaking up when things are going on. But we don't always know, even as adults, we don't know how to feel the feelings when someone's talking. So how can a parent or a teacher really practice doing that when they're talking to a child?
Yeah, I think that they can do that simply by reflecting back what they're hearing or saying to the child, "This is what I hear you saying," so that the child has an opportunity to come back and either say, "Yes, that's correct," or "No, that's not correct." So it can be real simple. Like, "You said this, I hear you saying this. I sense that you're feeling this way." It's because sometimes we just go to the word. So if you pick up on a feeling, you can reflect that back to the child. "I sense that you're feeling angry. I sense that you're feeling depressed. Is that right? Or can you help me understand that?" Or if it's a behavior, you can say, "I noticed that you were doing this. Can you help me understand why you were doing that?" Rather than accuse the child of inappropriate behavior, let's say, you say, "Well, I observed that you were doing this. Can you help me understand why you were doing it? Can you help me understand what was going on behind the surface?" So you're really giving a child the opportunity to give feedback to you as to why they're feeling the way they're feeling, why they're thinking the way they're thinking, or why they're behaving the way that they are. You're approaching it from a curiosity point of view and inviting that child to engage in a discussion with you from a curiosity point of view, not accusing, but a curiosity. "I'm curious. Help me understand this better."
I think that's going to be really helpful for a lot of listeners, specifically parents, or teachers,
Yeah.
because it's so often we can be so busy in our day, and sometimes our interactions with children can almost be transactional. Like you're just doing something for them, and you send them along their way, and so you have to take that time to pay attention to the children who are in your life and say, "Hey, something is different. Your pattern is off." And so that's why I think it's so important to have, this kind of conversation,
Yeah.
because sometimes somebody has to kind of sound the alarm to make you say,
Yeah.
I have been noticing something different. And so
Yeah.
I did want to touch a little bit on just you personally. How did you I know you got started in this work, you said a while ago, but was this something you always dreamed of doing? Did it kind of fall into your lap? Can you tell us, a little bit
It,
about your backstory?
it sort of fell into my lap because I had spent 30 years in state level education, elementary and secondary education. And towards the end of that tenure, after 30 years, I began to work part-time at a mental health crisis center. And I was working with people who would come to the crisis center from the emergency room because of a mental health issue, a mental health struggle that they were going through. And I noticed that a number of them had also a substance abuse issue. So I got curious about that, and I went back to the University of Illinois and got some more education and training in substance abuse, and then moved further into doing mental health and substance abuse counseling part-time. Until I was offered the full-time job at Menninger Clinic, which is one of the top psychiatric hospitals in the nation, and relocated to Houston, and then started to work with adolescents and adults, and really felt like that was what I was supposed to be doing at that time, moving away from education and moving in to help people that were really struggling with mental health or substance abuse issues. And I worked with both adults and adolescents. They both have their own unique challenges, but I really enjoyed working with adolescents, even though they were struggling with mental health issues, substance abuse issues. They were a real blessing to work with. So I sort of found that, I had a mission that changed from purely educational administration into mental health and substance abuse counseling.
And so I always ask people who have these kind of jobs that where you're giving a lot of yourself, right? You really have to be, this is not just something you can just, it's not one of those jobs you can just do, like just fly by night. Like you really have to think about what you're doing, how you're handling these children, how the conversations you're having. And so how do you personally stay grounded? How do you stay peaceful, I guess, is the question. Because I did work in juvenile detention centers, and you can get heavy if you're not getting enough like self-care and
Yeah.
doing the things you need so that you're able to pour out into the lives of the children you're working with. So
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Well, I actually enjoyed working with the teenagers. Usually they would come into Menninger Clinic and they'd be angry and oppositional and, trying to negotiate and bargain themselves out of coming into a hospital. But I noticed after a very short period of time, they settled down and got engaged in the therapy and the programs and made some remarkable progress. And I actually enjoyed working with them because it wasn't all work. It was sometimes fun. They can be funny. They can be challenging, but they can be very funny too. So I actually enjoyed my interaction with them. But the job cannot be all consuming either, as you noticed, because even teachers, sometimes they get overwhelmed. You have to make sure that you're taking care of both your own mental and physical health. For me, that involved doing things with my family. I enjoy reading. I enjoy watching certain sports activities. I enjoy traveling. Now that I'm retired, I engage in more physical activities, exercising, working out at the gym, watching my nutrition. So all of those things I think are important for us to do, whether we're in the academic teaching field or the mental health field or the substance abuse field, because it can become exhausting. It can become time consuming. So we have to make sure that we keep ourselves as a priority and we're taking good care of ourselves as well.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I just think I really admire the work that you do because I think it's a calling, I believe, when people, get to really help people get their life back and get back on track. And so I know you mentioned earlier that you said that you had a book that you have
Yes.
written. And so can you talk a little bit more about the book? I know you said it was some steps in there for parents, but can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit more about the book and what you really want the parents to walk away with or the educators to walk away with after having read your book?
I want them to walk away with the feeling that they have a better understanding of adolescent substance abuse. And if you're a parent, I know that this can be a very frightening subject that many parents want to stay away from. They want to believe it can never happen to their child. But believe me, it can happen to any child anywhere. So for parents who read the book, I would hope they would walk away feeling less paranoid, less fearful, and more confident that if they have to deal with this issue, they know what to do. I've got this. I know what I can do. I hope I never have to deal with it, but if I do, I feel like I can take care of that. So I feel like I can handle it. For teachers, I would hope that they would feel that they now have a little bit better understanding of the warning signs to look for it, and parents too, and that I have a little bit better understanding of adolescent substance abuse. So my book covers a number of topics. It gives a brief overview of the substances that are out there. We know about alcohol and marijuana. Most parents know about that. Most teens know about that. Most teachers know about it. But you may not be familiar with some of the other drugs that are out there on the street. So I put a brief review of those drugs. I put a chapter on that helps us understand how these drugs work in the teenage brain. And that's very important for teachers and for parents to understand that our brains don't get fully developed until we're around 24 or 25. So it's very important to understand that the teenage brain, that adolescent brain, is in the process of developing and forming those critical circuits and forms that they will need in adult life. And it's very important to protect that brain from being abused by alcohol or drugs. I have a chapter that talks about what assessments should you get done. If you think your child is having a problem with alcohol or drugs, what assessments should you get done? I have a chapter that helps parents understand, what does a good treatment program look like? What are the treatment options that are out there? And how do you recognize a good treatment program? And if you're looking for a treatment program, what questions should you ask a treatment provider, a treatment center, so that you have the information that you need? There's a section in the book that talks about what we call process disorders. Alcohol and drugs are chemical disorders, but there's also process disorders which are more behavioral. Examples would be eating disorders and self-injury. And I put warning signs for both of those in my book because I've had teenagers who were in treatment at Menninger Clinic who were using drugs and also had developed an eating disorder, or were using drugs and were also self-harming themselves. So teachers need to know the warning signs for a child that's developing an eating disorder and a child that might be self-harming, because kids are very, very clever. They know how to hide the warning signs of, say, a child that might be cutting on themselves. So parents and teachers need to know what those warning signs are, because, kids are very clever at hiding them. And then there's a list of resources in the book that I think teachers and parents can find helpful.
I definitely know from experience that children are very clever.
Yes, they are. Yeah, they are.
They can get away with things, and really, sometimes you can really be baffled by the things that they can kind of do, or how they can kind of hide things, especially if they feel ashamed or they feel like they may get in trouble about it.
Right.
They're definitely, they're not thinking, hey, I need help with this. They're just thinking, I probably shouldn't be doing this, and so let me not tell anybody.
Yeah.
And so I did want to ask too, when you were talking about when a parent maybe has identified this and they've said, okay, my child needs assessments, or they need a treatment. Does income matter when it comes to that? Does it matter if you're coming from a low income, or you maybe feel like you don't have the money to send your child to a good treatment facility? Are there resources for people who are listening who maybe don't come from a background where they have insurance, or, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think sadly that does affect a lot of families who don't have the income to perhaps get the very best assessments or the very best treatment providers, or even if you have insurance, it still may become very costly. And then there's people who just don't have insurance because they can't afford it. So what can you do if you're in that situation? I would suggest the first thing you should do is work with the school counselors that you have and the school social workers, because many of them can do some of these assessments. Some of these school social workers and school counselors can do some advising and counseling, and that shouldn't cost you anything. It should be provided by the school district. There are public mental health clinics, the National Association, local mental health clinics that oftentimes will provide either free or low-cost services. So I would say that if you're in this situation, use those services, use those public services that are available. Begin with your school district, begin with your school counselors, begin with your school social workers, because many of them are very well trained and very qualified to give you some help, and they can do some of the assessments as well.
Well, that's really good to know, because I definitely didn't know that like some of the school counselors and stuff could do that. So I think that's very important, because I just hate when I see, a parent that maybe is in distress and they feel like that money is what's holding them back from getting the proper care for their child. And I think, for children, they should always be the most important thing. And so I love that. I'm excited to see more people become educated on this, so that there's fewer children that fall by the wayside, because, if a child does go untreated, if they just continue on, with a substance abuse, what are some of the things that likely are to, happen with, maybe a young teenager who just kind of takes on this lifestyle?
Well, a number of things. They could get involved with the legal system. They could have legal problems, which would jeopardize their ability to get a job or get to school or get into college. They may carry the substance abuse into adulthood, and it may escalate. It may start out as maybe just some binge drinking of alcohol or some casual use of marijuana, and then it escalates and it gets into multiple uses. You may start out just infrequently using a substance, and then it becomes daily, and then it becomes multiple times a day, or maybe it escalates away from marijuana into more hardcore drugs, and before you know it, it spins out of control. And that's why early intervention and early treatment is the best thing. The earlier we can catch these symptoms, the earlier we can provide treatment, the more likely that the child as an adolescent is going to put it behind them and not carry it into adulthood. And that's really what we want.
Exactly. I feel that is definitely the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Richard, this conversation has been very informative, and I really thank you for taking the time to write the book, to pour into the youth that you have poured into over the many years that you have done this. I know there's probably somebody who's listening to this who needed to hear this specific thing and just maybe was kind of hopeless and didn't know where to go with their child. And so if you could just take a couple minutes and maybe speak to that parent who is listening right now, who maybe knows that their child has some of these symptoms, or maybe they're just too afraid to even get an assessment, or they feel like they've failed. If you could just encourage them for a minute or two, I think that'd be very beneficial.
Yeah, I would recommend to those parents and really to all the teachers and everybody who's listening to our conversation to get a copy of my book, The Addicted Child, A Parent's Guide to Adolescent Substance Abuse. It's not going to cost you very much. It's available as a Kindle or a paperback, and just read it. It's not going to take you very long. It's only about 100 pages, but hopefully it will give you a sense of feeling a little bit better about this topic, a little bit more confident about it. It's available on Amazon. You can get through the book website, get to it through the book's website, which is www.helptheaddictedchild.com, helptheaddictedchild.com. Overall, my message is a message of hope. We know that treatment works. We know that early intervention works. So if you're a parent and you are afraid of this topic, or maybe you're going through this right now with a child, my message is a message of hope. You can get through this. Your child can get through this. Your family can get through this. And one other thing I would say to parents, we put a lot of focus on the child, as we should, who's using a substance. But we often forget the parents. We often forget that the parent is going through a crisis also. And the parent needs support and help as well. So if you're a parent out there and you're going through this, please get support and help for yourself. You're going to need that support. Maybe it's a good friend. Maybe it's a member of your local church. Maybe it's your pastor. Maybe it's the local mental health society. Maybe it's a support group. But get some support for you, because you deserve the support and encouragement. This is going to be a journey, and you and your child are going to go through this journey. So hopefully your child is getting help, but in the process of your child getting help, make sure that you're getting the support and the encouragement and the help that you need and deserve as well. If you do, both of you can get through this and come out on the other end successfully.
Richard, I thank you so much for that. And I thank you so much for this conversation today. I pray that whoever is listening to this, they take what he said to heart. Check out his book. If you go to unmuteyourmic.org, there you're going to find out more information about Richard. I will also put the link to purchase his book so that you can have more of this information. This is only a 30-minute conversation, so that book is really going to be able to dive deep into a lot of the topics that we have already started talking about. So even if you are not a parent, if you are a teacher, a youth advocate, somebody who just has children in your life that you really care about and want to make sure they're on the right track, I suggest that you go get that book. And where I'm going to put all of Richard's contact information on unmuteyourmic.org as well. Richard, thank you so much for this conversation. It has been truly amazing.
Thank you, Jessica. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me and to participate in this discussion with me. So thank you so much. I appreciate it very much.
Of course. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. As always, you can go to unmuteyourmic.org. There you can find other episodes, this episode's information about all of our guests, and you can stay connected with me and them. You can like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you can find a podcast. Don't forget to be bold, be heard, and continue to unmute your mic. Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you for tuning in to Unmute Your Mic. Be sure to tune in next time when Jessica takes her mic off mute as she continues her journey to find stories that inspire and uplift our communities.